And the first thing I told them was the founder should get rid of the founder title, because a founder is like an entitlement. And I think a lot of founders feel like they're entitled. I'm a founder of the company, therefore I should be CEO. That's just not the way it works. And every company goes through stages, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 1,000 on up. And I hit my limit at 1,000. And that's fine. I'm enjoying my work far better than I was at that time. Some people can make it all the way through, but most people don't. So there's no shame in it. It's the ones that sort of resist. It's the people that think their capabilities are here and they're really down here. Those almost never recover because they're not self-aware.
Welcome to another edition of Outsider Inc. I'm your host, Ian Hathaway. Today, we're talking with Kevin O'Connor, an entrepreneurial pioneer who helped shape the foundations of the commercial internet as we know it today. As the co-founder and CEO of DoubleClick, Kevin didn't just build a groundbreaking internet company, he helped establish Silicon Alley, which was New York's answer to Silicon Valley as a thriving tech hub in the mid to late 1990s. After navigating the highs and lows of the dot-com boom, Kevin transitioned into startup investing as an early investor and mentor to multiple tech companies that would go on to produce billions of dollars in exit value, including Procore Technologies, where he remains today as a board director of the publicly traded company. Later, Kevin returned to his founding roots with Graphiq, a data aggregation and vertical search platform he led that later became a key component of Amazon's Alexa platform after its acquisition in 2017. Today, as the founder and general partner of ScOp Venture Capital, he focuses on helping early software companies grow beyond their initial stages and tackle the challenges of scaling. Kevin's amazing career has been defined by his ability to spot big opportunities before others do, find and support non-consensus talent early on, and scale businesses that leave a lasting impact. Along the way, he's developed a unique leadership style and a passion for building outside traditional tech hubs. I'm excited to dive into the pivotal moments of Kevin's career, from founding his first company while still in college, to leading DoubleClick through its meteoric rise in the dot-com boom, to launching a startup revolution in New York City and beyond. We'll also hear his insights on venture capital investing, the evolving tech landscape, and the many lessons he's learned about leadership, resilience, and innovation. Kevin O'Connor, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Ian. That was one of the best intros I've heard. Was that you or GPT?
I have a good team, and I've done my homework. So This should be a good one.
Succinct and accurate. So thank you.
So Kevin, you grew up in a middle-class suburb outside Detroit, and you were this kid with larger-than-life curiosity, especially having an early interest in electronics. You talked before about going out on Thursday nights, which was trash night, to collect old television sets and radios so that you could disassemble the parts and build new creations, or how you would combine chemicals to blow things up. But you went on to earn a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering just down the road at the University of Michigan. And at the time, you planned to pursue a PhD and work for Bell Labs, aspiring to become an inventor and maybe even to win a Nobel Prize one day. But instead, you chose to become an entrepreneur, launching a company called ICC during your final semester in college in the spring of 1983. So tell us a little bit about your decision to forego your dream of becoming a world-renowned research scientist and instead to ride the wave of the PC revolution as an entrepreneur.
Back in 83, I don't even think I even knew what the word entrepreneur was. No one ever spoke of it. But there were these guys called Bill Gates and Steve Jobs that were sort of changing the world, dropping out of school. And I was lucky enough to get an internship at IBM on one of the first PC projects. I saw that as this is going to change the world. And somehow, because I was one of the few people actually developing on the PC, I became, one of the top experts on PCs. So there was not very many of us. And I had met another guy the year before doing an internship at Texas Instruments, Bill Miller, and he was connecting Apple computers to Burroughs mainframes, and he wanted to connect PCs to mainframes. So I was like, yes. And quite honestly, electrical engineering, it was a bit boring. It was mostly math. And I really wanted to get my hands dirty, and I love coding. I love coding a lot. I wasn't allowed to code at IBM. At least they told me I wasn't allowed to code. And I would go in at night and fix people's bugs, and they couldn't figure out how their programs were compiling the next morning, I told them I fixed their bugs and they said, okay, you can start programming now. So I got really hooked on computer software.
So you started this company in college and you ended up building it to a successful exit in 1992 to a company called DCA. What was that journey like for you, that initial almost decade as a founder?
I was young. I was pretty much an individual contributor. I developed products. That's what I really like to do. And then DCA, when they bought us, they wanted me to go down and start like a research group. And I was asking people within the company, we were probably about, 300 people at the time, who was the best engineer? And they kept going, this new guy named Dwight Merriman is really, really good. You got to talk to him. So I had never met Dwight, and I was talking to Dwight. I said, what have you heard about me? And he said, I heard you're an asshole. And I said, oh, that's so great. Someone that would tell me what they think. And then Dwight Merriman went on to do, he and I co-founded DoubleClick. And then he went on to do even bigger things, MongoDB. He's just one of the world's greatest. I thought I was like a really, really good engineer. And then you meet a guy like Dwight Merriman and you're like, it's time to move into management. This guy is just 10 times better than I am.
Well, speaking of Dwight, you hinted at the fact that you guys went on to found a company that would eventually be called DoubleClick. I think it was originally called the Internet Advertising Federation at the outset.
A history of bad names.
It's okay. You figured it out later on. So you sell your first company to this publicly traded company in Atlanta, DCA. You move down there. You bring Dwight with you. You went through this journey at DCA. It was public, then it was acquired. I guess it merged with a competitor along the way. You eventually leave the company in 95 and you and Dwight decide you're going to start a company. Before we dig into how you came about that, other than Dwight being this amazing engineer, what was it about him that made you want to start a company with him?
So when we were at DCA, our responsibility was to come up with new products, research. And this is a hard to believe story, but it's true. You can talk to Dwight about this, but we were trying to capture organizational knowledge. And we came up with this product called OpenMind. And OpenMind was virtually identical to what Slack is today. It was one of the first client server using the web browser. This is back in like 93. And we installed it in large organizations and they immediately pulled it out because it destroyed productivity. So it was this colossal failure. So a big, huge disaster. But we had also worked on other products. And Dwight was just a guy that he wrote his own web browser. The only web browser out there were terrible ones. They were the open source ones. And he did it in, a month. And he took OpenMind and made it, it was a very complex system. And people thought it'd take a year or two to build with 10 engineers. And Dwight said, give me the weekend to think about this. And, he came back, 3 days later with a working prototype. He invents his way out of everything. And Dwight and I we complimented each other. We had complete trust. So when I left, and then he left, a few months later, we just kicked around ideas. We came up with 100 different product ideas, and a bunch of them went on to become $1 billion. We didn't do them. We chose not to do them for various reasons, mostly through ignorance. And then we settled on DoubleClick.
So it's 95. You're in your basement, literally in your basement in Alpharetta, Georgia, outside Atlanta, and you're kicking around these ideas. What was it about the internet that you realized, look, this is going to change the world. I need to drop everything that I'm doing and land on advertising, which you didn't really have any experience in. What was kind of the motivation behind that idea?
So not all of our product ideas were around the internet. Most people didn't know what the internet was. But I think we both came to the conclusion, here's a system where anyone in the world at any time will be able to get access to the world's knowledge. That's a big idea. Like that's going to be really, really successful. Then we're trying to figure out, it's kind of, how do you make money? This is a brand new city. And we knew that as it shifted from sort of a government entity to commercial entities, it had to be run by the good old free market. So my original idea was to do subscriptions like, I think CompuServe operated that way. So you get a sports package and depending upon how often people go to that site, you would share revenue with the partner. And then Dwight said, hey, isn't advertising bigger in media? And it was like, that's a kind of a dumb question, but yeah, advertising is way bigger than subscriptions. And then that was sort of the pivotal moment. After looking at sort of 100, we probably came up with hundreds of ideas, but 100 legitimate ideas. Dwight's dumb question sort of like I don't know, it's epiphany. Steve Blank calls it an epiphany, and I think that's a good word. The lights go off. And I remember going upstairs and say, okay, we're starting the company tomorrow. And that was it.
The rest is history. So you and Dwight were these brilliant technologists and entrepreneurs who were onto something, right? About making money on the internet and advertising being a key component of that, but lacked the knowledge or networks and advertising. Like, how did you overcome those initial obstacles and evolve DoubleClick into a real business?
So we knew Atlanta wasn't the place, and there was only 4 of us at the time. We merged with a group called DoubleClick, who had 4 media salespeople. And they were in New York and San Francisco. We knew Atlanta wasn't a place. We had to decide, should we move to San Francisco, Silicon Valley, where all technology is, or do we move to New York, where most of the publishing and advertising world is there? Dwight and I both do technology. So if anything, I thought Silicon Valley was getting it wrong. They were making up terms that had been used for 150 years in media. It was just kind of like, we know better. And so we wanted to move into the heart of publishing and advertising. And so we packed up our bags and moved up there.
So ultimately, this was a decision to be close to the customer and maybe to a lesser degree to avoid some of the groupthink and echo chamber that you were observing in the Valley. New York today is rivaling Silicon Valley for global dominance in most product categories, but it was nothing like that in the mid to late 1990s. People today may fail to appreciate that. So maybe go back to that time. What was New York like early on? And were there ever any moments where you felt like you had made the wrong choice?
Look, even today, Silicon Valley gets 50% of all venture money in the United States. Back then, it was probably like 90%. But, look, I built our first company in Cincinnati, Ohio, and DCA was in Atlanta. So I felt pretty comfortable that, engineers mostly come out of the East Coast and Midwest. So there's a lot of good people everywhere. And there was a lot of people that doubted New York. They're like, New York, what do they know about technology? Well, who's built the biggest transaction systems in the world? It's New York. So, we had access to a ton of talent, and we were building, today it's got to be the largest transaction system on the planet with Google. Every ad displayed was a microtransaction, basically, and we had to account for it. Where did it display and who's paying for it? I don't think I ever doubted New York. There was 2 types of publisher. There's sort of like the new age publishers that were coming out, the websites, obviously, the Excites and the Yahoos, which were all West Coast. But we had a lot of confidence that, magazines and newspapers would move online eventually. That was tough, though, convincing sort of old school media companies that the internet was real. I had a conversation with Bloomberg. I didn't really know who Mike Bloomberg was, and I was trying to get them to have us sell their advertising on the internet. And the guy's looking at me. He was like, he was a younger guy. He's like, we totally get it. We believe you. Internet's great. But, Mike just doesn't really believe in the internet. And they're like, will you talk to Mike? I'm like, yeah, I'll talk to Mike. What the hell? I don't know who the guy is. So I'm talking to Mike, and I said, I go, Mike, the internet's going to be big. Everyone's going to be using the internet. And he looks at me and he goes, I'm a fucking mogul and I don't use the internet. So I started laughing because I've never heard anyone use the word mogul other than discussing Genghis Khan. So I started laughing, and Mike Bloomberg's got that great sort of hangdog face. He's not laughing at all. But that was what we ran into. And so our theory eventually was that, look, this is inevitable. The old guys running these media companies are going to die one day. And it all played out. The people that grew up with the internet and didn't know anything different, eventually took over all these companies. And the harder part, though, was getting the traditional advertisers to go over. They were very hesitant, reluctant. And our pitch was pretty basic. You got to go where the eyeballs go. It's that simple. They're not watching TV and they're on the internet. You got to go to the internet. And that worked pretty well. Really worked a lot with the industry to say, look, we're not competing against each other yet. We're competing against TV, radio, and print.
So you mentioned you moved to New York to be close to customers, took some convincing with some, maybe less so with others. You were near talent. You acquired the sales team. I think it was the Poppy Tyson folks. So you had the sort of the networked and the go-to-market folks, and some of the largest systems were being built in New York, transactional systems for technical talent. What about capital? Did you raise capital early on? Were there angel investors? Was there VCs? And was that a thing in New York at the time?
So Dwight and I, invested our own money. And then we merged with the DoubleClick group. That was owned, Poppy Tyson was owned by BJK. It was a big holding company. And part of the deal was that they would give us, I forget how much money, $1 million. But they also kind of gave us access to their financial systems where we could just order anything. And it was a little bit loosely run. We were just using them as just sort of a piggy bank. Eventually, they caught up to it and we had to pay them back in stock. So it was a hell of a deal for them. But that was our venture capital initially. When we split it off to get them out of the picture, the internet was taking off. And we were, I think, 10 million at the time. So we were doing very well. And Greylock, who I sat on a board with at ISS, I went to Dave Strom and said, look, we want to buy these guys out. And he said, I'll do it. And he contacted Bain Capital and they put together a deal in weeks for $85 million to buy them out, which worked out great for them. And it worked even better for us. But venture capital, one thing I've learned about Silicon Valley, I think it's very tough to get venture capital in the early days because there's just too many companies. And why would you got plenty of companies right down the street from you. And it's easier to do board meetings and meet the people. Once you get to a certain size, there's not that many $5, $10 million, $20 million companies out there. So they will look at them at that point. But to your venture capital question, I don't even remember if there was a VC in New York.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the atmosphere. You guys were growing super fast. There's this like almost brash decision to brand Silicon Alley. I read about Lee Nadler's idea to put this billboard up at 22nd and Broadway. Was it a means to attract talent, to get people to come to New York and work for you instead of going to the Valley? You're growing fast. Heard about some of these parties, a basketball court on the roof. I just want to go back to those wild .com days where things were growing and a lot of stuff was happening. What was it like to be at the center of all of that?
Just to put some numbers on it, we went from late 95, 2 people, to 2,500 people 4 years later, 2,500 people in 25 countries. It was just an insane growth. So I think it started off relatively slow as you're trying to convince people. And then the internet just blew up and you kind of go back and look at VC funding. At the time, probably late 96 or really 97, it just exploded, which really fueled our company's growth too, because all these companies were internet companies raising $10 million and they got to go spend it on advertising to promote their site and products. And so we were the beneficiary of it. It was a crazy, crazy fun time. Finding office space was probably the hardest thing.
Yeah.
We were just jamming people into sardines. We had people sitting next to elevator shafts, but it was fun. A lot of crazy ideas though. I mean, the internet was back in those days, people kept talking about the new economy and the hype. And I knew we were in trouble. I told Kevin Ryan one day, I was at the airport and virtually every magazine cover was about the internet. And Kevin and I had been elected to the top 50 most interesting people to have lunch with from W Magazine. And I told Kevin Ryan, I'm like, shit is going to hit the fan. This is so overhyped. It's going to be terrible.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. So shit did hit the fan. .com bubble bursts in early 2000. The industry's wiped out, but you guys survived. You decided to step away and Kevin Ryan took over as CEO. I know you stayed on as chairman for another 5 years or so. What was it like? Tell me about the decision to step away at that moment.
Credit to Jeff Epstein, who was our CFO. And the market was very hot for money. We didn't need money. And Jeff wanted to raise money. I said, Jeff, why are we raising money? He goes, Kevin, when people want to give you money, you take it. So we had raised $400 million. We had already gone public and we ended up raising a ton of money at the exact right time. Right around that time, though, the privacy thing hit. It went from just a small story in the U.S. Play Today business section, completely inaccurate story. And it kind of festered there, got some attention. And then the privacy groups really piled on. We had a story, I remember it was Cosmo, publicly canceled their contract with us. It was a $6,000 a year contract. It was a super small customer. Front page of the Wall Street Journal, we lose $1 billion in market cap. And by the way, I talked to that reporter at the time and I'm like, why are you writing this story? $6,000 front page of the Wall Street Journal. And the reporter goes off the record, my editor told me to get you because he's pissed that USA Today scooped the story. That journalist, by the way, was Glenn Simpson. He was the guy behind the Steele dossier. So then the whole privacy thing just blew up. And I was spending all my time with politicians, privacy groups, media, lawyers. We were sued by the FTC. We were sued by 8 states. We had a class action lawsuit And it was just, that's all I was doing. It just wasn't fun. And I was spending all my time doing that. I was kind of the guy that designed the trains, and Kevin Ryan was the one who kept the trains running on schedule. Kevin Ryan loved that stuff. He loved doing it. So I decided I can't be a good CEO. I was a reluctant CEO. It was never my plan or goal. It just turned out I was pretty decent at it. But Kevin was better at that stage of the company. So I handed it over to Kevin. And then a few months later, the dot-com crash happened, and poor Kevin. But he was way better positioned. I know that as well. My goal in life was I didn't want to be fired by the board. I wanted to know when I was no longer capable of being the best CEO.
Yeah, but it seemed like you also had the self-awareness around that. Do you feel like more CEOs need to have that wherewithal that what got you here won't necessarily get you there, and at some point it's okay to evolve out into a different role?
Kleiner invested in our last company. They asked me to talk to the founders. And the first thing I told them was the founders should get rid of the founder title. Stop calling yourself founders. Because a founder is like an entitlement. And I think a lot of founders feel like they're entitled. I'm a founder of the company, therefore I should be CEO. That's just not the way it works. And every company goes through stages, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 1,000 on up. And I hit my limit at 1,000, and that's fine. I'm enjoying my work far better than I was at that time. Some people can make it all the way through. Tui at Procore, he's made it all the way through. He's had struggles at certain points, but he's made it through. And it's great when you can do it, but most people don't. So there's no shame in it. It's the ones that sort of resist. It's the people that think their capabilities are here and they're really down here. It's almost an unfixable. Those almost never recover because they're not self-aware.
Yeah, I feel like it's too many times in the opposite direction. But being a founder, you didn't start the company with the idea of selling it, but you eventually did. 2005, you sell DoubleClick to private equity for $1 billion, step out as chairman. Later, of course, the company was famously bought by Google for $3.1 billion in 2007. A lot of people say that that was the most important acquisition in Google's history, even more than YouTube, even more than Android. Now, I know you had been out of the company for a few years by that point, but do you agree with those statements?
I think I talked to one of the corp dev people at Google, and he told me, he's like, DoubleClick was such a successful acquisition for them. I mean, I'm thrilled that it's become successful for Google. It turned out to be one of the biggest returns for private equity, and still don't get any kind of Christmas gifts or anything from them. So
yeah, it's a big turnaround for them. What, a 3X in a short amount of time?
It might have been more because they sold off pieces. The company had to be broken up. They did well, and they leveraged it. I bet their equity, it was probably like a 10X for them.
Well, so I guess just kind of closing out that chapter, the legacy of DoubleClick, it's credited as launching the New York tech startup scene as we know it today. I read a study that was tracing the genealogy of some of these early companies like DoubleClick, Buddy Media, AppNexus, and similar to how Fairchild Semiconductor spawned all these new companies in Silicon Valley, DoubleClick had the highest rate of that in New York. What would you say about the lasting legacy of DoubleClick in New York's tech scene?
We had a pretty simple goal when we hired like really high IQ, we call them smart athletes, really high IQ, competitive people. We were totally transparent. We did everything based on merit. So I wrote a piece that's sort of a nonlinear career. People think of careers as very, very linear. We would take people, I call them Michael Jordans. Who would you give the ball to when there's 3 seconds left? So we would promote people that were just animals, super smart, got stuff done. I think it helped people develop that confidence, develop know-how, and realize that they can go out and do this on their own. And it's great that people went on and built great companies.
Okay, so shortly after you stepped down as CEO in 2000, you moved the family to Santa Barbara, where, among other things, you began investing your own funds into startups under the banner of O'Connor Ventures. Santa Barbara has this reputation where you go for vacation or you go to retire. So tell us a little bit about the decision to move to Santa Barbara. And maybe second, if you could weave in why you think people get it wrong about the tech community in Santa Barbara then and today.
So I wanted to go someplace to raise a family that was nice, and I just needed to decompress. I had no idea. I didn't even know where Santa Barbara was, and I had no idea that Santa Barbara even had a tech community. Maybe after 6 months of a year of taking off, I just started talking to more people in SoCal, got involved with sort of Surfline for surfing. And then I met a guy in 2004, I guess, Tui Cormache, he was building homes but he had a software background and he built a product in Visual Basic. Just to give a sort of backdrop on Santa Barbara, one, it's got a great university, UCSB, great engineering school. It's got two of the biggest private software companies in the world that people never really heard of, Yardi and Green Hills Software. They had several public companies, big software companies, QAD. Sonos was there, software.com. So there was all these companies that were coming out of Santa Barbara. And I didn't realize that. I always say that Santa Barbara probably has more tech per capita than maybe even Silicon Valley. We just don't have any capita. So it's just a very small 200,000 people in the area. But, over the past decade, AppFolio, Procore, there's been some big Sonos, huge tech companies that come out of there. And it's expensive here, but it's easy to recruit people, especially college kids, because it's a great place to live. There's a lot of hardcore people in Santa Barbara, and it's a great place to live. UCSB's got great professors because it's a great place to live. So you're able to attract good people.
I grew up in the cornfields of Ohio, and I've been here coming up on 5 years, and every day this place takes my breath away. It's just everywhere you turn, amazing sunsets, beautiful vistas. It's a hard place to leave. Did the surprising nature of the tech community, is that what pulled you back in? You did want to throw in the towel and you decided to keep investing and building. What kind of re-energized you?
So let's say I threw a towel in for a year. I didn't know my kids at all. I was working constantly and traveling. So I was just never present. So, I coached 5-year-old girl soccer, my daughter's team and things like that. And that was great. But I knew I wasn't going to retire. I was just trying to figure out what do you do next. So I started investing and sitting on boards just to see what was happening, what kind of grabbed my attention. I didn't think I was going to start another company, but I kept coming back to this idea of find the best, and no one else was doing it. And I tend to get singly obsessed with stuff. So I wanted to do one more company. And so I did it.
So let's talk about this decision in 2009 where you co-founded Graphiq, which was Find the Best at the time. I know it eventually evolved to building this knowledge graph and vertical search engines, kind of like what Kayak did for travel bookings. What about this idea got you excited, and why did you just decide to jump in?
It was probably Kayak. Kayak came out and, there was other vertical search engines, but not many. I was mostly on the travel side. And the idea was basically just, why aren't there vertical search engines for, 500 other topics for making, highly considered purchase, presenting all the information to someone so they could do it. And I thought vertical search engines were, doing stuff that search engines couldn't. So that was a basic premise, and it's all the same. It's just you bring in a data set and you have different filters and ratings, and we could build this platform and crank out these eventually 200 or 300 different vertical search engines. And we start connecting these search engines together. You get a company database, and that ties into all the different companies, and you get location information. It's all the same. Google comes out and talks about this thing called a knowledge graph. And as we learned about it, I was like, wait a second, we have a knowledge graph. We have a bigger knowledge graph than Google does. And so the company ended up doing the ultimate pivot. So the vertical search engines were good. We were doing probably $20 million a year, but it was advertising based. It wasn't that valuable. We were very dependent on Google algorithms. They made an algorithm change and half our business went away one day. So we had to sort of expand beyond that. But eventually we came to the conclusion, all these personal assistants like Siri and Amazon Alexa and Google were developing these personal assistants. And we're like, wait a second, they're doing it wrong. We took the Jeopardy approach that in order to answer a question, you have to get the answer. And the answer is the hard part. People are very focused on trying to understand, it's called natural language processing, trying to understand what is English and what do they really mean? It's actually pretty easy when you have the answer. And so we started pitching these companies like, hey, you guys are doing it wrong. You got to do hard work and bring in the data. And the first time around, they didn't believe it. Second time around, we had a hackathon, and Dylan, who was a great engineer, he ripped out the brains of Alexa and he stuck our brains in and tapped into our knowledge graph. And they filmed it and they sent it off to the various people we've been speaking to and showing comparisons on how we were so much better. I think I even sent it to Jeff Bezos as well. And I imagine an email went out saying, who is this company? Why are they better than us? What do they do? So it was the ultimate pivot. And we ended up selling to Amazon.
Yeah. So Talk a little bit about that decision. You sold in 2017. Sounds like there were other big platforms in play. Why Amazon? Why did you decide to sell then? And I guess what was it like becoming an employee of Amazon?
We were sort of losing momentum in the business, and we had hired a lot of people sort of young, right out of school, and they were anxious. They were anxious to see something. Our existing business, it wasn't necessarily that attractive for selling. And so when we felt like this would be our best route for an exit. My whole thing for businesses, we tell our companies, don't think about exit strategy, think about optionality. And the way to get to optionality is you build a great product that people want. And when you build something that people want, a lot of people are going to come to you and try to buy it. So that's what we focused on, was creating a good option. And it turned out to be a decent deal for investors. It was a really good deal for employees because of the retention bonuses. I told Amazon I'd give them a year and I thought it'd be horrible. Amazon's a really good company. I didn't think I was going to learn anything. I learned a lot there. As I've told other companies, startups tend to discount people from big companies. But the reality is, look, we all want to become a big company, and companies become big because they're doing something right. So there's a lot to be learned from large organizations. And there's a lot to learn from Amazon.
Well, look, you've built as a founder and operator multiple big companies, but I think I'm equally, if not more, impressed by the big companies you've invested in. The first of these going back to 1995, when you invested in a company called ISS, which eventually went public and was acquired by IBM for $1.4 billion in 2006. This was still pretty early on in your career. You were in Atlanta. You met the founder, Chris Klaus. What was it about him that got you excited and ultimately got you to make that investment?
So he was introduced by a lawyer. He's like, you got to talk to this kid. I don't know if he's got something interesting, but he just doesn't really know what to do, how to build a company. And he was like this 20-year-old dropout from Georgia Tech living with his grandmother. So I went to talk to him, and it was an internet scanner. So internet scanners basically would be like hiring a professional burglar to come to your house and show you how they would break in. And then you would fix all the things to make it safer. So he did this for computer systems. And I started talking to him, and he had sold this product to 10 Fortune 500 companies for $25,000 each. So on his own, an engineer had built this product and sold it. And I was like, what? That's insane. And so I just got involved with the company, put money in, was helping him build it, helped recruit the CEO, Tom Noonan, and then they took off.
Well, so another non-consensus founder that you were an early believer in did not initially attract a lot of capital early on. You mentioned him before, right? Tui Courtemanche from Procore. Obviously, that company turned into be a huge success, going public in 2021 with the $8 billion exit value. Today, I think it's trading with a market cap above 11 billion. But this was anything but an obvious bet to many. It was anything but an overnight success. Tell us a little bit about what it was like meeting Tui, believing in this company, and being on this long journey, almost 2 decades from the company's foundation to ultimately going public.
So I figured exactly how he met Tui in 2004. I mean, it was Montecito, small community. And he was telling me about he built this product to help general contractors, and how general contractors they just use pen and paper. And, I could kind of relate to it because we'd gone through a couple of projects, and they're always, takes longer and twice as much as you expect. And then I started doing some research on it, and I came across this McKinsey report showing industries, how big they are, and then what is their IT spending. So I saw construction was, the third largest industry in the country, and it was like number, 37 in IT spending. They spend nothing in IT. And it had the lowest productivity growth out of any industry, including local government, which is almost impossible to do. You have to have negative productivity growth to beat the local government. And so I was like, okay, I got hooked on this. Like, vertical software is going to be really, really big. Like, every company is going to become a technology company at some point. Banks were already becoming tech companies, but every company. And Tui knew construction, he knew technology, and he's just a charismatic guy that was just really, really passionate. I forget how much I initially invested, but gave him some money, and it took a long time. And I remember meetings with investors. They couldn't make payroll. Tui loves the story. Couldn't make payroll. So I lent them some money. They couldn't pay me back, so they turned it into equity, which was good.
How'd that turn out for you?
Good. It was better than debt. But, it just took a long, long, long time. And I remember investors were sitting around like, should we throw good money after bad money? But then sort of a confluence of events happened that really took off.
As an investor, how do you know whether you're throwing good money after bad, and how do you know when you need to stick with it?
You don't. So you never know. I mean, everything in life is probabilistic. So you try to measure the probability. Part of it is what's the conviction of the entrepreneur? And I tell them, you've committed 6 years of your life. You could have been making 10 times more money. You're making a bigger commitment. You're going to keep doing this. You should quit. You should stop. And then, kind of see how they react. And if they're like, no, I'm going to keep doing it, then you do it.
Well, it ended up being an awesome investment for you, and it sounds like a ton of fun. It's a great company, did big things in a very difficult space. Construction tech is not easy. Were there any other investments that you are especially proud of?
I mean, right now with ScOp, we got 23 investments. I'm proud of all of those. But
yeah,
we started the fund in 2021. Pearly was the first one to actually deliver cash back to LP. That's a Santa Barbara-based company. Another Santa Barbara-based company that just raised a lot of money from Silicon Valley is Unwrap.ai, so that's quite good. Snag is a really interesting company that came out of UCSB. We're very focused on sort of vertical SaaS AI, and Mike Tucker, one of the partners, came in and said, hey, these guys want to pitch a online delivery. And I'm like, there's no way. Online delivery is so like, what a horrible business. And they came in and showed us their business. We're like, damn, this is good. So they basically do online delivery for college campuses. They own all the inventory. And they think of it as every college has a convenience store, and it's a bank, and it just prints money. And so these guys are the leaders in the market for doing online delivery for college. So that's great. We had a few companies in New York that are doing some really incredible stuff. So, all of our companies are outside Silicon Valley, name of your podcast, Outsiders, and it's fun. Entrepreneurs are everywhere.
On that note, I mean, you've had a ton of experience on both sides of the table. You alluded a little bit to Smart Athletes framework. What do you think is most important in a founder? Not just what you look for when you're evaluating an investment opportunity, but just in general, coaching a founder through the inevitable ups and downs. What are the most important things that a founder needs to know? Maybe someone who's starting off right now and hasn't done this before, about what's coming, what they need to expect, and what they just need to be prepared for.
So there's probably three things. One is IQ. You can't teach IQ. So you need someone who's really smart. And that smartness doesn't, look, you can look, okay, they graduate Stanford. That's great. They're smart. Harvard. They're smart. That's not, TUI, I don't think, did a semester, or you got someone who drops out. So it's not just where they went to school. I mean, that's an indicator, but it's not by any means for certain. You want grit. You want someone who's competitive, someone who's shown a history of being competitive and not giving up. I'll ask the question, do you find more thrill in the victory, or are you more afraid of losing? And a lot of people will say, it's the losing. You don't remember your victories, you remember your losses. So just that I can't lose. And then the other one is just being self-aware and objective as data comes in. And look, everything you do is a hypothesis. There was a great quote another VC said, I can't remember his name, so I'll steal it. Toughest part about analyzing a founder is he a visionary or delusional? There's like a really thin line. The visionary will have a strong conviction, but will take data in. And if that data shows that their hypothesis is wrong, they will change, The delusional ones won't. They'll just keep going. This is mine. This is my idea. I can't show any weakness. It's all me. So it's a little hard to do when you're evaluating a company. You don't tend to find that out till later, but you try to figure that out.
So maybe last big question. You've had an amazing career. You've worked with a lot of phenomenal people. What are you most proud of?
I don't spend a lot of time looking back, and pride's kind of a bad thing. I think pride leads to hubris. I'm in my wisdom years now. My biggest fear is always sort of looking in the past. Hubris comes with success, and I really try not to do that. I'm thankful that my passion and my talents align. I like doing this stuff. It's great not having to do it, because then you really know your sort of true incentive or true motivation. I just love doing it. I love working with founders. We're working with young companies. and helping them really understand, like, business is simple. This is what you got to do.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a very good way to get at that legacy, is that you do what you love doing. So with that, we're about out of time, and we like to finish these episodes with what we call Beyond the Bio, which is kind of a quick lightning round, some fun questions to go beyond the resume and get to know you a little bit better.
Let's do it.
Okay. What's a quick piece of advice from a mentor that stuck with you throughout your journey?
He was more trustful of me than I was of him. Trust people.
Trust people. Okay. Who's an unsung hero in your life, and what has been the impact they've had on you?
Well, it was probably my wrestling coach in high school. He told me, it was almost like Yoda. He's like, your problem is you're afraid to be good. As you become good at something, the competition becomes stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. You have to be willing to put in the hard work and have the confidence and to keep doing it. And so it kind of stuck by me.
As someone who grew up in the Midwest, how do you feel like those Midwest roots have shaped you as a person and as an entrepreneur?
Midwest people don't really talk. They're honest. They're hardworking. They care about family. They're just kind of good old values. They're not braggadocious. They're not hypesters. There's a lot of hype in our industry. So I tend to try to keep things reasonable. It's more believable, and it's more true.
All right. Tell us something that most people don't know about you. Could be a hobby, travel spot, guilty pleasure, hidden talent.
I'm the best over 60 white breakdancer in Santa Barbara.
How does one become the greatest over 60 white breakdancer in Santa Barbara?
I'm probably the only one who even attempts to do a breakdance move. So it goes back a long, long time ago. When breaking first came out, in the early 80s, I was like, oh, this is great. This is I was a pole vaulter and wrestler, and, this is like a physical thing. So I started doing a little bit. I'm not good at all. Just no one ever did it. So there's no competition.
Okay. I love that.
I break it out at almost every wedding, though.
Oh, great.
After a few drinks.
I'm sure your family loves that. So on the music theme, then, what are one or two songs you'd like to add to our Spotify Founders playlist? Something that fuels your workday or has inspired you on your journey as an entrepreneur?
I mean, anything from The Who, Eminence Front, Can't You Hear Me Knocking from the Stones. That was it.
Perfect. Love it. Okay. Final question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's about to go out and start their first company today, particularly someone who's doing it from an outsider status, what would it be? Don't do it. Unless you can afford to do it. Most ideas suck. So just because you came up with one idea probably means it sucks. So yeah, get in the basement, 99 more ideas. Love it. Yeah, and pressure test it, because once you commit to it, you're risking everything. So fair enough. Okay, Kevin, that was an awesome conversation. I learned a ton and had a great time. I hope you did too. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Ian. It was fun.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Outsider Inc. A big thank you to Kevin O'Connor for joining us to share his incredible story and wisdom. Kevin's journey is a masterclass in building beyond convention. From launching and scaling ventures in Ann Arbor, Cincinnati, Atlanta, and Santa Barbara, to creating the spark that fueled New York City's now thriving tech ecosystem, Kevin proved that entrepreneurial success can be spawned anywhere. As a pioneer of the commercial internet and a first-check backer of billion-dollar outcomes in overlooked markets and founders, Kevin has consistently bet early on non-obvious people, places, and ideas. What stands out to me most is his clarity of thought, radical candor, and a deep conviction in outsiders, whether it's where they're from, how they think, or how long it takes. To me, his legacy is less about what he built and more about the people and ecosystems he empowered to build after him. If you want more from Outsider Inc., don't forget to subscribe to the platform at outsiderinc.substack.com. It's packed with highlights from today's episode and bonus insights you won't want to miss. You can follow Outsider Inc. on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Outsider Inc. Pod. You can also follow me on X at Ian Hathaway. Outsider Inc. is produced by Spellbinder Media. We'll be back soon with another fascinating outsider conversation. Until then, thank you so much for listening, and remember, great entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. See you next time.